My name is Katrina Walser and I am from Oliphant Cat, and I am a knitting teacher and designer based in Sydney in Australia. I have a tutorial today for how to do provisional cast-ons with a crochet hook. Alright, so what you're going to need for this is one of the knitting needles that you are actually knitting a piece with and a crochet hook that is about the same size. So in this case, I've got a 4mm needle and a 4.5mm hook. And you also need some relatively slippery or smooth yarn, and I would very much recommend cotton, that is about the same weight as the yarn that you're going to be using for the project. So in my case, I'm using fingering weight or 4-ply, which is what I'm going to be using for the project. But this is just scrap yarn. It's not the actual yarn that you'll be using. So to set up, what you need to do is a couple of stitches of what's called a crochet chain. You take your yarn and you make a slip knot like normal. And you stick your hook in the loop and pull it tight like you normally would for a knitting cast on. And then what you do, you take the yarn and you wrap it from the right to the left over the top of the crochet hook. And then you grab the hook part and you use it to hook the yarn through the loop you just made. So one more time, the yarn from the right to the left over the top, and then hook it through the loop that's already on the hook. If you're a Continental knitter, this is a little bit easier actually. You just hold it like you normally would when you're knitting, and you grab the hook and pull it under the yarn and then let it lay over the top, and then pull it through the loop. Again, go under the yarn and then pull it through. So you want about 5 or 6 of these stitches, and then you grab a locking stitch marker and stick it into the first stitch of the chain. You need to be able to figure out later on which side is the side that had the slip knot and which side is the ending of the cast on. All right, so now what you do, it's going to be exactly the same motion, but you're going to sandwich your knitting needle in between the hook and the yarn. Hold the knitting needle so it's under the hook. Take your hook behind and under the yarn and then hook it through the loop that was on the hook. When you're done, pull this behind the knitting needle and then take the hook, go under the yarn to scoop it up, and then pull it through the loop that was already on the hook. And then move the yarn behind the knitting needle. So, under the yarn, hook it through the loop that's on the hook, and then move the yarn behind the knitting needle. So if you're holding the yarn in your right hand, hold it like this, put the yarn behind the knitting needle and over the top of the crochet hook. Then pull it through the loop. Again, put it behind the knitting needle and then on top of the crochet hook and pull it through. So hold it like a cross, move the yarn so it's behind the knitting needle and then on top of the crochet hook. And that's it. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, oh, and there's one more hiding under here, 8 stitches on our knitting needle. And so you just keep going like that. I actually find it easiest to just move it behind the knitting needle with this finger until you have all the stitches that you need on your knitting needle. And I actually need quite a few, so I'm going to go away and do that for now. And I'll come back and show you how to end off with the waste yarn and start with the real yarn when I'm done. So I've finished the cast on part of this. I have all the stitches that I need on my needle. So the last thing you need to do is just do a couple of stitches of that crochet chain again. So ignore the knitting needle as much as you can and just grab the yarn. So you should still have one loop here on your crochet hook, and that's not a stitch. So you just need to make sure you have as many stitches as you need on the actual knitting needle. And then grab the yarn again, pull it from the right to the left, and then through this loop Just be really careful not to accidentally pull all the stitches off your knitting needle. Right to left, through the loop, through the loop. And then you just cut the yarn and pull your hook out of the loop and pull the yarn through it, just like you would end off on the end of a knitting bind off. Just pull it tight so it makes a knot. And that is your provisional cast on. So at this point, you can just treat these like they are knitting stitches. One thing I will say is that these are all in waste yarn. So this is not the yarn that you want to actually be using for your project. And you'll have to see in the pattern what it tells you in terms of whether to cast on with a provisional cast on that uses waste yarn or one that uses the main yarn, because if it doesn't want you to do a cast on that has the main yarn, you'll need to do a row of knit stitches with the real yarn. So the way you do that is insert your needle into here, and then at this point it's just like knitting. So this is my real yarn that I'm using, not the waste one. Just start off however you normally join a new color of yarn and just knit like usual. And you're good to go. That's what it looks like after you've done a row. Okay, so I finished my piece, and this is the provisional cast on that we did. And so what we do to get the live stitches actually back onto the needles is you find the end where you ended the cast on. So in our case, we put the stitch marker on the slip knot side, so we are going to go to the other side. So I'm going to undo the knot, but you can just cut it off with scissors if you want, just the very end of it. And if we've done this right, it should just undo itself as you pull it. And there are two ways of doing this. So the first one is, and do this very carefully and slowly, is you pull on the waste yarn, and as you pull, it will expose a live loop. So if we pull on this out, there's a loop, and so catch it on your needle. And then on the next one, pull it out again slowly, and that gives you a loop, so catch that on your needle. And again, pull on this, that gives you a loop, catch that on your needle. The other way that I usually do it that feels a little bit more secure, instead of pulling on the waste yarn to expose the loop first, I will actually put the loops onto the needle before I pull the waste yarn out. The stitches you're looking for are these stitches here. It's like an upside down loop, and it has the pink running through it. So I'm going to put that loop here onto my needle. The next one is over here, and the next one's over here. And so I'll put a handful of stitches onto my needle, and then I'll unzip the waste yarn. And that way you don't have live loops just sitting around exposed. And that's it. So you just keep going until you have all your stitches on the needle, and at the end the waste yarn will just fall out and you're done. Alright, so that's how you actually do them, and I hope that you have a decent understanding now of how to do a provisional cast on and get the stitches back onto your needles. The one thing I did want to mention is that I know crochet hooks can be a little bit daunting. So if you watch this and you're still a little confused or you're still a little bit freaked out about the idea of using a crochet hook, I promise it's easier than it looks, but if you really don't want to use a hook or you just don't have a hook on hand, there are different ways of doing provisional cast-ons that just involve knitting needles. And so if that's something that you'd be interested in learning, let me know down in the comments and I'll try and make a video about those methods as well. If you did find this helpful though, make sure to like it, and if you want to see more videos, I publish every Thursday. So if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do that and click the little bell if you would like to see when I have new videos coming out. I will see you next Thursday, and until then, happy knitting!